The Baltimore Ravens are one of the best-run organizations in the National Football League. That doesn't feel like a very controversial or crazy thing to say at all. That feels like something generally most people would tend to agree with. So they are one of those teams, every year you look at them, you got to pencil them into the mix somehow, some way. Like whether they're a true title contender or not, maybe not always. But they're going to be in the mix for the playoffs. They might be in the mix to win the AFC North. Like they're always going to be around. And that certainly has been the trend throughout the years, especially in the John Harbaugh era. And 2022, wasn't necessarily a whole lot different. It didn't feel like it was going to be a whole lot different going into it. And it certainly started off well for the Baltimore Ravens, relatively speaking. That 7-3 record, if you tell any team in the NFL that through 10 games you're going to be 7-3, you'll actually feel really good about your spot. Even if you said, well, my team I have higher expectations for because they are that damn good, I'd expect them to be 8-2 or 9-1 through 10 games. If I told you 7-3 through 10 games, would you take it? Most everybody of rational, sound mind and body would say abso-freaking-lutely. And you'd probably even sit there and say, okay, what if you get 15 games through the season and you're sitting at 10-5 with 2 games left? Would you take that? More likely than not, yeah, you would. Because you would either assume or presume, A, your team's already made the playoffs, B, they're pretty damn close to making the playoffs if they haven't already. So, when you look at the Ravens, like a lot of teams fan bases wish that their team was where the Ravens were in terms of 2022 from a record standpoint. 10-5 with 2 games to go. But of course, in those last 2 games of the regular season, they kind of backdoored themselves into the playoffs like they had a bit of a tailspin. They lost to the Steelers and they lost to the Bengals. So they entered the playoffs at 10-7 without Lamar Jackson in the lineup, without a lot of momentum. And then they go and they put up a ugly kind of game fight in Cincinnati against the Bengals in the wild card round. But then you had that fumble that was returned by Sam Hubbard for a touchdown at the beginning of the fourth quarter. That was backbreaking. You could make an argument that the Ravens could have potentially won that wild card round game, and they certainly could have, but they ultimately didn't. And as a result, now season over. And it's another one of these things where, yeah, the Ravens are good, and they get to a certain point, but are they really the level of contender that you feel like they sometimes should be? I don't know. Not really. Because you look at the Ravens and, it was a typical Ravens offense again in 2022 from my estimation. They were highly effective running the ball and controlling the clock. Didn't matter who was in the backfield as a running back. Didn't matter whether it was Lamar Jackson or Tyler Huntley at quarterback. This is a team that consistently, systematically knows how to run the ball and can really, really do that well. Problem is, in the modern NFL, it's much more important to be able to throw the ball, and that is once again an area that the Baltimore Ravens struggled in 2022. And it didn't matter if it was with Lamar Jackson at quarterback or Tyler Huntley at quarterback. This team was not very good throwing the football. Defensively, it felt more like a typical type of Ravens defense. They were 9th in the league in total yards allowed, 3rd in points allowed. They made the midseason trade to bring in Roquan Smith. When you look at the perspective of the Ravens and where they were at, maybe that deal makes sense. I don't know how much sense it made to give him that $20 million a year contract as that part of that long-term extension, but hey, not the Bears' problem to worry with anymore. Let the Ravens deal with that. But they probably feel good about the initial returns on that deal since Roquan ended up making first-team All-Pro for the first time in his 5-year NFL career. But with all that being said, we know what the big story here was in 2022. Feels like a somewhat familiar refrain. Is Lamar Jackson getting hurt? He goes down with the injury in the Broncos game just as you're getting ready to go into December, and then he doesn't return the rest of the season, which stinks, right? You can sit there and make the defense of, well, with Tyler Huntley, you could do some similar things as you do with Lamar Jackson in the offense. And fundamentally, that is not invalid. And that's important it's an important reason why you want to have your backup quarterback share at least some similarities with your starter, so that way you can run similar things. But he's not Lamar Jackson. Let's be clear, especially as a runner and also, frankly, as a thrower too. But, when you started talking about the Ravens and getting ready for the playoffs, there's a bit of controversy here about whether Lamar Jackson could have played against the Bengals in the wild card round, should have played in the wild card round. And look, I don't know what Lamar Jackson's actual physical status was heading into that wild card round. If I was a teammate of his, maybe I would sit there and say, yeah, I totally get it. I wouldn't risk it if I was him either. He could really mess himself up. Or maybe I would sit there and say as a teammate of his, I get he's trying to take care of his business and protect himself for the long term. I respect that. But damn it all, he's supposed to be the leader of this team, and we kind of need him right now. I'd imagine for some of his teammates, it's kind of a mixed bag, right? I imagine it certainly is for fans. Probably some frustration about the fact that you didn't feel like he was rushing back to come and play, but meanwhile, maybe you understand unselfishly the long-term perspective here. And that's what it really comes down to with Lamar, is now you go into this offseason, you've already got some other key free agents, such as Marcus Peters and Justin Houston, who I can't even believe is still playing, but he actually not only played, but played well in 2022. But now you get to what's going to be the Lamar Jackson decision. And as of this time, they have not placed a franchise tag on him. There's certainly been a lot of reports about, negotiations of contract and where the Ravens are and where Lamar Jackson is and what he's trying to get for himself. You would assume the major hang-up is going to be just how much guaranteed money can Lamar Jackson get. It's going to be an interesting offseason for the Baltimore Ravens, especially if they put the non-exclusive franchise tag on Lamar. Because if they put the non-exclusive franchise tag on Lamar, somebody's going to sign him to an offer sheet. Somebody's going to want him. Whether that's the Falcons, whether that's the Panthers, whether that's the Commanders, the Raiders, somebody's coming for Lamar Jackson if the Ravens put the non-exclusive franchise tag on him. And you almost wonder, if they do that, that is a declaration at that point by the Ravens, even somewhat subtly, that they are ready to move on from Lamar Jackson and they would rather take the 2 first-round picks and perhaps some other compensation in return for letting Lamar Jackson go. So whenever you get to that decision, like I said, that decision hasn't been formally made as of the time of the recording of this video. But if they put the non-exclusive franchise tag on Lamar Jackson, even if he ends up playing under the franchise tag in 2023, even if he and the Ravens end up playing on working out a long-term contract, giving him a shit ton of guaranteed money, if they put that non-exclusive tag on him, that means that they're open to the possibility, at least, of him not being there in 2023, and would be an interesting play and an interesting demonstration by the Ravens organization. And it does beg the larger question, like, should they look to move on from him? However, if you do look to move on from him, who the hell's going to replace him? Sometimes it's easy to take for granted what you got until it's gone. Then where the hell do you go from there? If you think you're already struggling to throw the ball consistently, which you do as the Ravens, getting rid of Lamar Jackson certainly hell ain't going to help that, and still doesn't deal with the fact that you got some issues on that offense in terms of a lack of weapons in the passing game and probably need to fortify your offensive line a little bit. So yeah, it's going to be a drama-filled offseason potentially for the Baltimore Ravens and Lamar Jackson. Really curious to see how this is all going to play out.